They handed over 200,000 sets of armor. Only then did Rome deliver its real ultimatum. This wasn't war, this was the final act. Carthage was already shattered, bound by a treaty that forbade its own self-defense. Modern, we will show how Rome used its own ally as a weapon and how a political debate sealed a city's doom. Son, how does a superpower justify the total annihilation of a city that had already surrendered? The answer began not with a declaration of war, but with the insidious quiet of a flawed peace. For centuries, the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian state had been locked in a mortal contest. Their prize was the total control of the Western Mediterranean. Two great wars had already passed into history. In both, the Roman legions had asserted a clear and brutal superiority, striking blows that sent Carthage reeling. Yet the final definitive stroke, the coup de grace, had not yet been delivered. After the Second Punic War, which had seen the Titan Hannibal himself brought to heel, Carthage was left in fragments. It was a ghost of its former self, bound by a peace accord that left it utterly at the mercy of Rome. The agreement was a systematic dismantling of Carthaginian sovereignty. They were forced to pay a staggering price in silver, in territory, and most critically, in military autonomy. But the Carthaginian state, though broken, still existed. His heart, the great port city of Carthage, still beat. Its merchants still plied their trade, and its coffers slowly, painstakingly, began to refill. The Romans, ever watchful, ever paranoid, were acutely aware of this. They knew that the phoenix can, and often does, resurge from its own ashes. They saw a future where a new Hannibal might one day stand at their gates. Of all the sanctions and chains that Rome had placed upon Carthage, one was forged with particular malevolent genius. It was a single clause, devastating in its simplicity. The Punic state was forbidden from making war on any other nation, for any reason, without the explicit consent of the Roman Senate. This, of course, included defensive wars. It was a leash, and the master, Rome, had just handed the end of it to their most ambitious ally in North Africa, the Numidian king, Massinissa. Massinissa was a staunch friend of Rome, and he knew precisely how to leverage this situation. The Numidians were an expansionist power, hungry for land, and their Carthaginian neighbors possessed territory in abundance. He did not wait, he did not delay. Almost immediately, and with Rome's tacit blessing, Massinissa began to slice away at the Carthaginian borders. Garame, his horsemen, would thunder across the plains, seizing a farm, then a village, then an entire district. Chudinawar, the Carthaginian response was one of humiliated obedience. When they did not arm their soldiers, they did not send their armies. Instead, they sent ambassadors. They traveled first to Massinissa, who dismissed them, and then to Rome, where they implored the Senate for justice. One, they begged for permission to declare war, to simply defend their own lands. Each time the Romans not only refused, but in a chilling display of geopolitical cynicism, their arbitration committees invariably sided with the Numidians. The message was clear: your lands are not your own. Your sovereignty is an illusion. Your existence is permitted only as long as it serves us. And so, for an astonishing, agonizing span of time, the humiliated Carthaginians obeyed. Not that they watched as their territories were stripped away chunk by chunk. They swallowed their pride and abstained from any military action against their Numidian aggressors. They held true to the treaty that was strangling them. Pray, but this state of patient suffering could not last. A nation, like a person, can only endure so much. The breaking point arrived in the year 151 BC. Carthage had borne more than any state could reasonably be expected to bear. Massinissa, emboldened by decades of Roman impunity, launched yet another, larger-scale attack. And this time it was too much. Faction within the city, their patience exhausted, rallied the people. The Carthaginian commander, Hasdrubal, was given his mandate not by the cautious Senate, but by the roar of the populace. He gathered his army and, in a direct, desperate violation of the treaty, marched out to meet the Numidians in a counteroffensive. It was the act of self-defense they had been denied for a generation. The campaign that followed was a disaster. The long-dormant Carthaginian army was no match for the hardened Numidian forces. Carthage ultimately lost this conflict. But the military defeat was the least of their worries. Erraushuri, back in Carthage, the returning Hasdrubal was condemned to death by his own government, a frantic attempt to appease Rome by punishing the man who had broken the treaty. It was a useless gesture. The news of the unauthorized war sent a shockwave through Rome. It was the very pretext the Hawks had been waiting for. The phoenix had twitched. It had shown it still had talons. Far from forgetting about the weak and defeated Carthage, a significant number of Roman senators raised their voices in a vehement chorus. They declared that the very existence of Carthage, regardless of its weakness, was an existential threat to Rome. Therefore, they argued, Carthage must be destroyed. When this was not by any means a unanimous or simple decision. The Senate was deeply divided on the issue, a stark confrontation between two opposing views of Rome's future. The debate was fierce, a clash of political titans. On one side stood the powerful senator, Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica. He argued passionately that Carthage must remain intact.
Let the city remain intact.
His reasoning was complex and deeply psychological. He believed that Rome needed a rival. This constant, lingering threat of Carthage, he argued, was a necessary tool for the Roman state. It served to keep the Republic united, to bind the Roman people together under a common sense of purpose, to prevent them from growing soft and decadent. A Rome without fear, he might have argued, will turn on itself. We need this shadow to keep our own virtues sharp. On the other side stood Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Censor. His position was simple, absolute, and relentless. Cato argued that Carthage must be utterly destroyed. He saw no value in a pet rival. He saw only danger. By this time, Carthage had managed to pay off the last of its crushing war reparations. Its economy, though restricted, was showing undeniable signs of growth. To Cato, this recovery was not a sign of a normalizing neighbor, but of a resurgent enemy. The unauthorized military action against Numidia, even though it was a desperate response to aggression, was the proof he needed. The Carthaginians had given Rome every reason it required to declare a final, definitive war. Cato famously or infamously ended every speech he gave in the Senate, no matter the topic, with the same chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Meanwhile, while this debate raged, Carthage, hearing the terrifying rumors of the war faction in Rome, frantically tried to de-escalate. They sent ambassadors, they offered apologies, they stressed their condemnation of Hasdrubal. They attempted to resolve the entire crisis through diplomacy. But it was far too late for any negotiation. Had the faction of Cato had won the debate, the arguments of Scipio Nasica were discarded. The Roman Republic had made its decision. Time for proxies and treaties was over. Carthage must be destroyed. In 149 BC, the declaration was made formal. An enormous Roman army, led by the two consuls, Manius Manilius and Lucius Calpurnius Piso, set sail. Yet they did not sail for Carthage, not yet. Edibasor. They landed at the port city of Utica, a major Phoenician hub not far from Carthage itself, which had strategically allied itself with Rome. The trap was now set. Even with Roman legions disembarking on their shores, the Carthaginians still clung to a desperate, naive hope for diplomacy. They could not believe this was truly the end. Totui, they immediately dispatched an embassy to the Roman consuls in Utica with the goal of making peace at any cost. Oh, this for the Romans was the perfect opportunity. They saw the Carthaginian desperation not as a reason for mercy, but as a weakness to be exploited. A cold, cruel strategy of deception was put into motion. Aleph. The Roman consuls received the embassy with a mask of stern solemnity. They listened to the Carthaginian pleas for peace.
Consuls. Show mercy to Carthage. We accept your terms, only spare our city.
They then made their first demand. The ambassadors returned to Carthage with the news. The city was convulsed in grief. The consuls were unmoved. Much so, but a city that truly desires peace has no need of weapons. Every sword, every shield, every helmet, every spear. Every catapult, every ballista, every ship in their harbor. This demand struck the city with a cold dread. Oh, but what choice did they have? The Roman army was at their gates. To refuse was to declare war, a war they could not possibly win. To obey might, just might, save their city. So a funereal procession began. A stream of wagons flowed from Carthage to Utica, piled high with the city's defenses. 200,000 sets of armor were handed over. Thousands of artillery pieces, the pride of their workshops, were surrendered. The entire Carthaginian navy was sailed to Utica and given to the consuls. The city was now naked. The ambassadors returned to the Roman camp for a third time, their heads bowed, having obeyed the impossible. They stood before Manilius and Piso and stated that Carthage had fully complied. Cameron, they were now ready to hear Rome's terms for peace. Samum, it was only then, with Carthage disarmed, its children held hostage, and its spirit broken, that the consuls dropped the facade. Lucius Calpurnius Piso spoke the words that would be seared into history. The Roman Senate appreciates your obedience.
Swift and immediate obedience.
Huniran, we have one final requirement. The people of Carthage must abandon their city. Inmine, the city itself is to be moved inland, no less than 10 miles from the sea. The city of Carthage, your port, your walls, your homes, it is to be destroyed. It was at this point that the Carthaginians finally irrevocably understood. Wyvern, there was no negotiation. Ime, there was no peace. This was not a treaty. It was an execution. The ambassadors were stunned, then enraged. Tontama, they railed, they pleaded, they cursed the duplicity of the consuls. But it changed nothing. Chushui, they were tired of begging. They were tired of humiliation. Habrana'a, they understood that only one option had ever truly been left to them: to defend their city, their home, to the very last breath. The ambassadors returned to Carthage. When they relayed the final ultimatum, the city that had been quiet with fear and grief erupted into a singular, unified paroxysm of rage. The illusion of peace was shattered, replaced by the terrible clarity of their situation. The citizens who had moments before advocated for peace were now the most vocal in their calls for war. Haradinanda, they turned on the nobles who had pushed for compliance, their anger a tidal wave. City plunged into a violent, cathartic chaos. Roman merchants and envoys still within the walls were seized, their safety guaranteed no longer. The gates of the city were barred, a symbolic act of defiance. Their first collective act was one of desperation and genius. The man they had condemned to death, Hasdrubal, was still in his cell. The very general who had defied Rome and attacked Numidia was now their only hope. The populace stormed the prison, freed the condemned commander, and fell at his feet.
Defend us!
They liberated the man they had sentenced and now begged him to defend Carthage one last time. Not from the Numidians, but from the Romans themselves. Hasdrubal, a man of tactical skill and now burning with a need for vindication, accepted. He took command of a city that had no army, no weapons, and no fleet. What happened next was a miracle of human defiance. West of the entire city became a forge. Temples were torn down for timber to build new ships and catapults. Public buildings were stripped of their metal fixtures, which were melted down into swords and spearheads. Nauyur, the great workshops, which had been silent, roared back to life 24 hours a day.
Keep the fires hot. More metal now.
In a legendary act of sacrifice, the noble women of Carthage, their children already hostages, cut off their long hair to be woven into ropes for the new artillery pieces. In a matter of weeks, an unarmed city, through sheer force of will, had armed itself. Akram, when the Roman consuls Manilius and Piso finally marched their legions to the walls of Carthage, they were not met by a surrendering populace. They were met by high walls bristling with new-made weapons and a people consumed by a desperate fury. The Romans quickly understood that they would not simply walk over the city. The walls of Carthage were among the most formidable in the ancient world. A direct assault was impossible. They would have to besiege the city. This led to a painfully slow development during the first phase of the war. The Romans, confident in their superiority, were sloppy. Westward, the Carthaginians, now led by Hasdrubal, fought with the strength of the doomed. They launched surprise raids on the Roman supply lines. They sent out small teams to try and damage the Roman ships. Hainum, the invaders managed to defend themselves, but they made no progress. The siege bogged down. Showing small-scale vicious skirmishes became a constant, bloody routine. This stalemate continued into the next year. The lack of progress was an embarrassment to
This war
Rome.
has become a laughingstock for Rome. We demand action!
After the election of new consuls, Rome changed its strategy. The new commanders decided that instead of continuing the difficult siege of Carthage, they would first attack Carthage's allies in the region. The plan was to cut Carthage off, weaken it by destroying its support network, and then return to deal with the demoralized and isolated capital. This plan, however, did not go as well as the Romans had hoped. Domine Rei Urem, most of Carthage's allies, inspired by the city's defiance, resisted the Roman attacks fiercely. The war was dragging on, becoming a quagmire. Rome, the unstoppable power of the Mediterranean, was being held at bay by a city it had already declared dead. This all changed once more in 147 BC. Rome, frustrated and impatient, turned to a name that still echoed with glory. They elected Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus as consul. He was the grandson, by adoption, of the mythical Scipio Africanus, the man who had defeated Hannibal himself. The people, bypassing rules, demanded him. They gave him total control of the campaign against Carthage. And this was exactly what the Roman war effort needed. Scipio was not like the previous consuls. He was disciplined, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. He was the living embodiment of Roman determination. Meanwhile, inside the besieged city, the situation had also changed. The Carthaginian government, the one that had tried to appease Rome, had lost all respect among its own people. The city was in chaos. Hasdrubal the general saw his opportunity. He decided to take charge personally. In a swift and brutal coup, he overthrew the remaining governmental authorities and seized total control of the city.